welcome to Shamanic Freedom Radio on location. And me being a bit on the Mr. Bean side on the odd occasion, I forgot to bring my discs to record this interview at all. So there's a paradox for you. But luckily enough, Neil Kramer is a very prepared person. And yeah, Neil, welcome back again to Shamanic Freedom Radio.
It's great to be here with you, Niall.
Yeah, this is cool. We're standing in the Avebury Avenue, just outside the stone circles, alongside a big stone, and nice place to return to. I was thinking, could rename this podcast Paganic Freedom. What do you reckon? So yeah, what have you got for us today then? What are you going to talk to us about?
Well, I thought as we were here, the stone circles, the crop circles, obviously we've got to touch on those things. And I think in so doing we probably naturally lead on to some of the other stuff, that some of the themes you probably cover pretty consistently on your show. One thing I did want to mention was, you'd mentioned previously about field uplink, so I thought we could cover that as well, which is, for me, is pretty closely linked with the circles anyway. So if we start from there and see how we go. Have you managed to see any circles this year yourself?
The crop circles?
Yeah,
we were in one in Avebury when we come to do the Solstice podcast. We walked through one on the way to Windmill Hill, and yeah, I mean, I did go have a look in them. There were some little circles. I mean, it was a huge structure, but there were some little isolated circular shapes. And what I noticed was that there appeared to be, some of it was weaved clockwise, some of it was weaved anti-clockwise. For the life of me, you couldn't work out how anyone could do that with boards.
Yeah, I think the closer you look at them, you can look at the zoom out picture and think that's quite an interesting design and difficult to simulate with, as you say, rope and boards. But when you really look at the crop as it's laid down, when you see weaves and you see little twists of corn and weeds pulled up, I think that is extremely difficult to do with just a 6 foot square or circle. But on a massive scale, which is 2 or 3 acres of flattened crop, it's probably a few days work, and these things obviously are occurring overnight, in the dark, in the rain. So yeah, difficult to do by hand. Inevitably, I would say a good percentage of them are, maybe 20-30%, but I think it's getting easier and easier to detect the, what I would call, authentic circles.
Yeah. Also, I mean, the only conclusion I come to is what causes these circles is, if they are created interdimensionally, that could be one thing, but otherwise I can see either ETs or MI6 or CIA type ghosts sitting up there lasering them down, but I can't think of any other plausible way. There's definitely the idea of people with boards and ropes going in seems to be more and more ridiculous the more I think about it now. Yeah,
I was in a situation a couple of weeks ago, I think it was the 29th of July 2009, and me and a friend came down to Wiltshire to kind of take a look at the circles, do some work, have some fun, you know, just to kind of chill out a bit, but basically to get a lot of exposure to the sacred sites. We stayed at a place called Poulton Grange, which is just outside Marlborough, about a mile outside Marlborough. And stunningly, when we arrived, a crop circle had appeared the day we arrived on the land of the farmer that we were staying with. Certainly this year they've kind of taken on a bit of a personal significance, because I think it's just too much of a synchronicity, if you want to say it that way. So this particular circle, which is in a region called, I think it's called Ogbourne St Andrew, the day I arrived on the place we're staying at. So we saw that on
did you? Google or on the internet. We found that one.
So I've kind of taken much closer attention to the different layers of it, and I think that's what we find, that there is a surface level of data, which is, you know, you stood in flattened crop in quite an elegant design, and that's quite paradoxical, living in an industrial landscape really, with our favourite city Swindon just down the road, which is, you know, not the most sacred place in the universe, is it?
Oh no.
Just over the M4 and a few fields away. So you get a surface level of data, which is just interesting in itself. And then there's another layer below that, which is that very often they contain things like star maps, comet trajectories, details of planetary movements, which are quite difficult to spot even with, you know, computers and astronomical devices we have today. And there is quite a famous case of one affecting information about a comet that came into the system and kind of exploded, and for brief time it was the brightest object in the sky. I don't know if you heard about that one. Yeah, it was a couple of years ago or something, I can't quite remember, but this particular crop circle detailed that by virtue of the planetary positions, and I think that's documented on the web by a guy called Red Colley. I won't say what his real name is just in case. So there's information that nobody knows. No men know that. Some of them come down, nobody knows what the data is. But as you proceed down it, you get to even deeper levels of data, which there's a guy called Freddie Silver who wrote a very well respected and credible crop circle book called Secrets in the Fields, and he really describes them as temples, and rather than going to the trouble of shifting stone and building a temple over 100 years, we have a temple basically beamed into the field, and so it is a sacred space there and then as coordinates at that moment in time. So you essentially stood in a piece of sacred geometry. There's levels beyond that, but perhaps beyond the scope of what we're trying to do right now. But depending on who you are, if you're a scientist, you may never give it any serious thought whatsoever and just think it's a load of horse shit and never bother. If you're open-minded, you may come and take a look and consider it. If you're a kind of new age woo-woo person, you may come and take your clothes off and dance around, and that's fine as well. So there's something for everyone, I think.
Yeah. Well, I had a bit of an argument with a few people that wouldn't accept what crop circles were about, and I remember talking to them and saying, what if you make a mistake? And one person said, yeah, but you could make a mistake and then you can just go and correct that mistake by making another shape around it. And then I said to them, yeah, but then considering that you can't see the shape of the whole lot from the ground, you then have to be able to guess to go to the other side of the circle and find its symmetrical opposite, and if it's got if it's 4 things reflected, you've got to find it's 4 of them, and you've got to correct them as well, and then you've got to work out which angle to correct them, and there's not
a lot of scope for error, is there? No. And you don't see many, if any, mistakes.
No, and the fact is, if they were being built by, say, Bill and Bob with boards and string, there's an enormous error margin, there's an enormous chance of outtakes, there's an enormous chance of being caught red-handed halfway through.
The one we saw at Ogborn St Andrew was the day we arrived, that kind of night. I don't know if it was early in the morning or what, we don't actually know precisely when, but on the 29th it was pretty dark. The sky was charcoal grey, it was difficult conditions. When we walked into it, the ground was just slippy, dirty, difficult. So you're not talking about a sunny field with a blue sky in perfect conditions. It was windy, rainy, wet, dark. So that adds to the complexity, doesn't it, for someone who's wanting to hoax them, shall we say? Yeah,
they're not going to be wanting. They're going to be wanting to get out of there very quickly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But the only conclusions that I really could come to, I've already said this, is either they're appearing or they're being beamed from something, and there is a possibility that maybe ETs could be beaming them.
Well, yeah, I think Freddie Silver's view is, you can check this out for yourself, I won't try and kind of quote him because I've not kind of covered his texts for a while, but I do share his views that through humanity's history we do see the presence of what some people call watchers, or divine beings who kind of keep an eye out for us, and early Christian literature would perhaps use the word angels, which is something I kind of stay away from, to be honest, but it's potentially the same thing. And just in true Star Trek fashion, there is a universal law which is non-intervention. So if they watch our species making a balls up basically and being destructive, they cannot come down and say, sorry humans, you've made a mess of it, listen, this is what you need to do. That would not help us. Just as in the same way if somebody kind of came and did your maths homework for you, you don't actually learn. So what they do is they put subtle messages into the crop, which those of a materialist reductionist mindset would immediately discard anyway. So they're only available, these messages, to people who are intrinsically open-minded. And these messages, as some researchers would have it, can be beamed with effectively what we would call intent, which is an electromagnetic phenomena which could present itself as sound or light. So as light would touch the atmosphere, it would become almost like a sonic wave. And it has been shown in various academic circles that the crop can be superheated using water and almost like microwave bent at the nodes. So it's like taking water from 0 to 100 degrees C in a nanosecond and using that almost to sculpt the crop over. So in a very, very short space of time, using this probably very old technology, but we don't have it here right now, you can paint a design into the crop using the natural phenomena of what's around. And here where we stand now, we're on basically kind of chalk downland, and there's a lot of underground waterways, there's a lot of ley lines, so the energies required, i.e. electromagnetic energy and water, is here. So using the medium of the wheat, you could conceivably put geometry into the fields from a long way away.
Oh, that's cool. I know that they've been around for a long time now, and well, I mean, everyone who listens to this show knows that Britain is one of the most surveilled countries in the world, probably from space as well as CCTV cameras. And now with Google Maps, Google Earth, there are many things looking down from above, and there's no reason for why, if the crop circles are being caused by, like I say, Bill and Bob with boards, they would have been spotted. These people not only would have been spotted, I think they would have been rounded up by, like I say, MI5 or MI6. They would have been given an ASBO. I've spoken about ASBOs before on the programme, they know what I mean by that. And the Daily Mail would have put spreads over, they would have turned them into negative celebrities like Myra Hindley or Abu Hamza, and I'm sure that would have happened by now, because this is the way England works, and there's no way that any phenomenon like this could happen and not be seen.
No, I don't think so. And in 2007, I kind of probably got the most circles in the space of 3 weeks that is possible, which isn't the best way to do it. That's not what I was aiming to do. But during that time, what I noticed was pretty heavy helicopter military surveillance. And since that time, I've had emails from ex-military guys saying, yeah, we are responsible for logging them and recording them and photographing them, and not only that, but often the people who visit them as well. So despite what the military's kind of public facing line says, they definitely are interested, because I've sat at the edge of a field and watched Lynx helicopters fly up and down 25 times. So they're using surveillance helicopters to get a map of what's on the ground. And if they were just, I mean, there's a lot of military bases in Wiltshire and Salisbury Plain and stuff, so we don't ignore that, of course. But if they were just flying by or doing manoeuvres, they wouldn't be consistently doing it over, these 1 in 1,000 fields where a crop circle appears. So they are interested, and I've seen it with my own eyes. And on one occasion, I have been present when the chopper have so-called buzzed the people in the field, which means flying low at high speed. So I don't quite know why they would be doing that, and I don't think that even the kind of meat-headed sort of guys who are at the bottom of the rung would get away with that too much, because these choppers are sort of multi-million-pound pieces of kit, so they're not just fucking around in them. It's difficult because at the end of the day you have to kind of get in the field, take your shoes and socks off and walk around them and have a look at them to really connect with them. What goes on in terms of how they're made, I've suggested one possible way that could be, and of course we know that you can do them with ropes and boards, and there are a few videos floating around of orb activity, these little spherical things flying around the field, and there's an old Oliver's Castle video if you look on YouTube, and you can see that, which is, some people say is a hoax. The guy who made it said it's a hoax, and then somebody suggested that he was forced to say that. So we don't know. It's very difficult, and I think spending your time trying to figure it out and prove stuff is probably time thrown down the toilet, really.
Yeah.
For me, what they bring is, and I've spoke about this elsewhere recently, is they bring paradox to your life, which having had a chat with you for an hour in the pub, it's kind of one of your favourite things, really, isn't it?
Oh yeah, no, I do like paradoxes. Because the people that I refer to as left brain prisoners, I do like doing their heads in for fun. I know it's a bit mischievous of me, but
even for an open-minded guy like yourself and Anna here, who we shall speak to shortly, I believe, it brings the edge of the operating system, doesn't it? So all the things we think we know, and all the programs we run in our mind, and all the belief systems we carry, when you encounter a crop circle, you bump up against the edge of your operating system, which suggests the limits have been reached.
Yeah.
So you need to consider what that means for you in your own life, subjectively.
Yeah, well, I had a time once when went out for was it a mescaline trip in Epping Forest overnight, and it was a frosty night, and it got down to sub-zero, and I stood on ice. I knew I stood on ice. I mean, you know, it was quite obvious when you do. There was frost everywhere, and I could feel the feeling in my legs disappearing and going numb. So it was very obvious that the temperature was going to be 0, -1, -2. So I went and told a very particularly left-brained flatmate that I had at the time that it was freezing. It was below freezing where I was, and he told me that it was impossible for it to be below freezing because he checked the weather on the internet, and everywhere said that the weather was above 2 degrees. So therefore it's not possible. So he completely discarded direct experience. There's a lot of people that do that.
There is, and that is a perfect example of a restrictive operating system, where palpably what you feel with your body and what you see on the screen are at odds with each other. So I mean, it's funny you say that about the weather, because certainly this year we have been absolutely soaked to the skin at 10:30 AM, and then at 12:30 PM we've been baked. We've been sat there and it's been absolutely red hot. And I have noticed, keeping an eye on the weather, so for travel purposes, that the weather is so consistently wrong by the main sort of 3 or 4 people who do it. Like in the UK, it's the Met Office largely, isn't it? And it's just wrong every day. It's wrong in Cheshire, where I live, down here in Wiltshire, further down in Somerset. It's just wrong every single day. I think that the weather system is changing, and their records, which after 3 days forecasting anything beyond that is just based on previous data, is no longer relevant. I think the weather system is morphed.
Yeah, I think it is. I'm not sure about what to think about global warming or climate change, because on one hand I think there must be something there. There must be something plausible there, because if we've come along, we have put more CO2 into the atmosphere and we have polluted them. We're going to have some effect on it. But I also think that a lot of this has been exaggerated or been told half the truth. There is some manipulation on some other level, because there's a new green economy that they're trying to build. The greed heads are trying to build, if you like.
It's an excuse for taxation, isn't it? I mean, you can be very cynical about this stuff and delve into the shadow, shall we say, and for example, it's pretty clear that the Rockefeller Foundation basically funded feminism, and they did it because they wanted to tax women who previous to that were not being taxed because they were sat at home. So getting women into the workplace was not an act of liberation, it was an act of taxation. That's an extremely cynical viewpoint, but if anybody cares to track that information down, it does seem very compelling to me. And similarly, the whole green movement, which was just a joke in the kind of 70s and 80s, anybody doing that was considered a tree hugger and a bit of a hippie, weren't they? Now it's very fashionable, and the reason is because taxation, again, is an opportunity for these people. So the data, if you analyse it as objectively as possible, and you zoom out, not just on the Earth but to the other planets as well, there is data out there that suggests that every planet in the solar system is heating up, and it's part of a natural cycle. And although we're not helping things, we could pump out as much shit and CO2 as possible, and we still wouldn't be able to be responsible for the natural melting and re-establishment of the ice caps. That's a normal thing, it happens all the time. So the data that you see on BBC and CNN is just garbage, to be honest. You have to do the research yourself and take a look at it, and when you do, you find that it only makes sense as part of a very, very, very long cycle. Saying this is the warmest year in recorded history means nothing at all. What you've got to do is look into the geological record, look into the fossil record, look at what's happening on Mars, and look at what's happening, further out into the other distant reaches beyond the immediate planets, and you see that there is a pattern that is everywhere. As we move back toward the centre of the galaxy, as the alignment increases back to this kind of huge 26,000 year precessional cycle, cosmic radiation coming onto Earth increases. It's nothing to do with cars. It's
to do with the orbiting that the solar system itself is doing.
That's right,
around something else.
That's right, So the whole Milky Way basically orbits galactic centre, and as we approach this quite sacred alignment point, which comes to its apex really in and around 2012, we're being exposed to cosmic radiation that we haven't seen for anybody's recorded history. So the idea that civilizations come and go punctuated by cataclysm makes a lot of sense. So our history books suggest, don't they, that history really started a couple of thousand years ago, maybe 4,000 if you want to push it, and everything before then was just people scrabbling around in the dirt with a pretty miserable lifestyle. But I think when you look at alternative historians, particularly people who are as independent as possible, shall we say, mavericks, but credible and scholarly, you find that civilization comes along, the graph rises in complexity and sophistication, and then falls off. And every 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years that is repeated. So I think what we're looking at the moment is a moment in time when we're at a point of devolution, essentially. I think our sophistication, particularly where we stood now, which is covered in thousands of tons of stones which are difficult to lift today, it makes no sense looking at the technology that was available then, but to use anti-gravity devices and to use sonic technology, these stones would be easy to move. So you're talking about a civilization that was more advanced than us, that is responsible for, we're actually studying what's known as the avenue now, aren't we? A lot of the stones that we find here were brought from quite far away. Certainly at Stonehenge that's the case as well.
They're from Wales, aren't they?
They're brought here for the properties and what they contain, which some of them have a quite high quartz content, some of them have a magnetite content, and certainly with quartz it's a substance that anyone who's interested in crystals is well aware that it's programmable. Anyone who's interested in technology is aware that it's programmable. So what we could be looking at is a huge file server, effectively. It's just that we don't currently have the technology to access it.
No, that's true. And like you say, if you think about 3,000-4,000 years ago, the general consensus is everyone was savages living in caves and wearing animal skins. And no, it's true. I mean, there's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot we can't know, really, unless of course we could invent time travel. And I think that's the beauty of these places, that you can come here and start to immerse yourself in that paradox and say, we're stood next to one of the largest stones on the avenue. Although Anna is quite a quiet and modest girl, she just jumped on top of this huge, enormous, 15-foot stone. Just moving that stone would be enormous task to do. So why would they go to the trouble of doing that when they could use local materials like wood, maybe, and that would serve well for the generations upon generations? But they don't. They move something here that is extremely difficult to move, and they do it on purpose because they know that that will give it a long period of time before anybody can move it. So I think one of the clues in this is that these things cannot be moved. They must have thought about the fact that they can't be moved. Let's see where you're coming from.
So it's the site itself that's important to some degree, but also the stones in and of themselves, where some people may say, well, they're just markers. I don't think they are. I think they're more significant than that. They probably have the ability to record stuff, so just in the same way that we would use discs and lasers and kind of binary information. There's no reason why you couldn't do the same thing with this. In fact, I did notice before, one of the largest stones in the main circle has chipped off on the corner. I'll have to show you this if you're not seen. It's fascinating. You can see inside it a bit, and it looks like the inside of a sort of new age crystal shop. You've got this little crystallization inside with all these angles and stuff, and it makes you realise that we're not just looking at a lump of rock, we're looking at massive crystals in many cases. So the crystalline structure inside again is an important part of what's actually going on here.
Well, someone mentioned to me, I can't remember who it was, they may have mentioned it to me last time I come here for Solstice, that Britain, the British Isles if you like, and Brittany are the only places that you find in the world where you find circle formations, and nowhere else. But then at the same time, what with ancient Egypt and all the things that have happened in North and South America, right the way to Easter Island, it does look like it was all connected.
Yeah, it does. And I think if you look at dowsing maps and ley line maps, you can see this overlay of a grid across the land, and there are these particular lines that run north and south and east and west, and they are effectively power lines in a sense, and they formulate a grid in the same way that we would have a power grid now with our electricity and our, what are those things that, those big towers that carry the cables, what are they called?
Oh, the pylons.
Pylons, so we have these pylons that go across the land. I think the technology previously, the last time civilization reached a peak, which as I say exceeded ours, it was more subtle than that. They didn't have to build these huge goddamn ugly towers. They used what the land was doing itself. And if you plot those maps, you see at the intersection points you get things like Avebury, and you get things like Stonehenge, and you get things like Castle Rig in Yorkshire, and all over the place, in Ireland, in Greece, in France, in Germany. These structures are along very specific lines, and I mean, there's lots of authors who go into this in detail, but you find certainly in when the Romanists came, the first thing they did was dominate those sites, those intersection points, where you find cathedrals and churches and monuments and temples, whether they're Christian, whether they're pre-Christian. There is a knowledge that they know that they're on an important point. They're not just at the edge of the village, they're not just in the middle of London for just random reasons, they're on very specific energy points.
Well, it's funny you mention that, because well, I told you about this when we were in a pub where I live. The Millennium Commission in 2000 decided to build a stone circle at the top of my road in Brockley, Hilly Fields, and they decided to build on that. And at the other end, there's St John's Church. But then if you follow that line and you carry on, you can see the skyscrapers of Canary Wharf, and it all looks like...
You feel that is a distinct line.
Yeah, and I also noticed when walking up Blackheath, going there through I don't know if you know London very well, but there's this massive open heathland.
Yes.
Sort of, you've got Blackheath Village on one side, and you can see two churches. You go through the heath, you can see a church on one side, church on the other. If you stand in the middle, you can see that there's obviously a ley line, you know, and you can see that that as a result, that heathland was deliberately not built on for a certain reason.
Well, I think it's a very old technology. You know, I used to wonder when I was kind of 16, looking at a lot of occultic texts, why shapes and geometry could have any power. And to be honest, it was maybe a decade later, in my sort of mid-20s, that I started to realise that this so-called sacred geometry in itself has momentum and has power, and is able to effectively hold and direct and transform energy. So where you see sacred geometry, you are seeing alchemy, essentially. So you're seeing the collection of energy and it being held or amplified or transformed or whatever. And I think certainly in the what we might call conspiracy movement, if anybody follows it closely, they'll probably be well aware that if you look at the White House location and where that sits in Washington, it sits at the bottom of an inverted pentagram, which is a perfect pentagram, which is built into the street design.
Oh yeah.
And that isn't random, and that isn't just for utilitarian purposes, that isn't just for infrastructure efficiency, that is there because of its very particular sacred geometry. And unfortunately, the old hierarchy, shall we call them, however old they may be, and we're not talking a few thousand years, probably a few millennia, don't necessarily have our best interests at mind when they're transforming that energy.
No, because an upside down pentagram is used for malevolent use, isn't it?
Well, typically, yeah, they used to be formulated with what people today call Satanists, and Luciferians is quite a separate thing. It has been maligned with black magic, but I think what you're actually seeing is a holding pattern. They're taking energy out of the land and they're amplifying it and holding it. So whereas it should go into the land and into the minds and hearts of the people, it's not. It's being channeled away, sucked away, and taken away for malevolent purposes.
One of my favourite subjects I heard you speaking about before was field uplink. I heard you talking about that on Henrik's programme Red Ice Creation.
Yeah.
And tell us anything that you could elaborate on, maybe.
What I tend to do is take pretty ancient knowledge when I encounter it and just give it my own terminology. So I kind of do that quite a lot on my website, The Cleaver, which is where I put all my essays. And I come across terminology like chi energy, and some of the terminology from a physicist called David Bohm, I'm particularly kind of fond of, and he has the implicate order and the explicate order and enfoldment, and I kind of quite like some of those terms, but occasionally I come across pretty dense language, which actually Anna's probably much more qualified to go into than me, particularly in physics, where you encounter a lot of very specific terminology, which really just alienates people who aren't interested in that kind of thing. So field uplink is basically the notion that there is a field of consciousness which conducts itself into the individual, and what we consider as the brain as the engine of consciousness is not the case at all. For a long time now I've felt that the brain is essentially a sort of transmitter receiver, radio basically, but with the ability to access lots of different levels of information. And what we're doing is we are channeling consciousness from the field, shall we say, in quotes, into our individuated experience. So when we think, we are pulling information in from the field. When we love, when we hate, we are putting the energy into the field. So it starts to make a little bit more sense of what we were talking about earlier with the sacred geometry. Why would you gather 200,000 people together and create hate or create ecstasy? And it's because you are uploading and downloading it into a collective space that everybody accesses all the time. It also ties in with the kind of idea of non-locality for me, which is again the notion that consciousness is not local here in our heads as we sit and talk to each other as Neil and Anna and Niall. Instead it is something that we are conducting into us as we sit here, and it doesn't belong to us, it's something that we bring down. So field uplink, actually specifically that part of it, is probably best understood in an entheogenic context, where in certain situations, particularly with things like LSD 25, you can get a kind of transcendent bliss experience from time to time, where the individuation of consciousness is obliterated and you just go into the field and you feel part of everything, and you begin to understand that all the things we see around us, all the separate objects, are in fact one complete undivided flowing system. And when we see that, we understand that the old talk of oneness and everything is one and there is no self is the case, but in my view it has to be experienced. It looks very nice on paper, but the only opportunity you get to experience that in life is occasionally in extremes of emotion, particularly positive emotion, shall we say, like love and ecstasy and bliss, but more often in a concentrated form in meditation and by ingesting power plants, shall we call them. And the more organic, in a sense, the better. So in Europe our plants really are mushroom related largely, but because of kind of cheap international travel in the last century, we can know about ibogaine, we can know about ayahuasca, DMT in its crystalline and its more natural formats, as you know, with an MAO inhibitor as a tea and so on and so forth, and also the sage plant, Salvia divinorum, which is something I'm particularly interested in, which again is region specific in a sense, but these things do provide the ability for the brain to retune and just to move that dial from its customary, you know, radio 1 crap position, to be able to switch to other things and to go to other spaces which are all here, all present as we stand here now. I mean, we're looking at fields and we're looking at stones and there's a little road running by us, but this is just one station on the frequency, and lots of people talk about this, but field uplink is the ability to move from that back to the field, retain a sense of individuation and move to another point in time. So if you take a very organic, gentle, say salvia extract, you can go with yourself, so to speak, into the field, and it's possible to look at some of the geographical characteristics of where that plant is from. So very often ingesting salvia, you will see a very, very organic experience of what is in Mexico, where it comes from, even though I'm sat in Cheshire, in the north of England. And that is because, let's relate that to Sheldrake's formulation of morphogenetic fields, where the actual substance itself creates its own powerful multi-dimensional habit field. So all we're doing is tuning into that field, and it's not region specific, it's not local, it's something that exists everywhere at once.
Yeah, well, I noticed from different back when I could go to Camden and buy the mushrooms, I used to go to Epping Forest in the middle of the night and take a lot of them, but whenever I took different strains, like the Colombian ones or the Indian ones or whatever, I would feel different. I would, and they would be very distinctive, and I would always come back to that feeling. Like one feeling was with the Colombian mushrooms, I would take enough of them that I was completely trippy and completely altered, so that I was virtually having a stand-up dream in this mad alternative wonderland, you know, in the middle of the night, and I would feel these entities, and they were like one of the things that I would feel like were the salivating tongues and the sharp teeth of entities that were higher in the pecking order, waiting to eat me.
That doesn't sound very nice.
Well, it didn't sound very nice at the time, but it wasn't too scary. It was quite insightful. It made me feel like what it would be like to become another member of the animal kingdom, or to become, you know, how can I say, part of the food chain, away from the ego, away from the old artificial means that we use to keep ourselves. And this
so maybe the teaching is that we're not top of the order.
No, we're not.
Certainly not in a multi-dimensional space.
Yeah. And whenever I thought of this thing in a human or secular context, this feeling would then become the idea of being in prison and being beaten up by harder blokes than myself. Right? But it was like the Colombian ones would take me there, but it wasn't, like I say, it didn't put me in a bad trip, and it didn't appear to be any other way except just purely educational and insightful. It never made me feel negative. I was just aware that this thing, but the feeling itself was quite, in a funny kind of way, quite a good feeling.
So if you take other mushrooms, do you get a more pleasant and gentle experience if it's something from under a tree near your home?
I've not actually tried doing that.
Local mushrooms.
Oh, I haven't had any in for years, but
Liberty caps.
Yeah.
Like that.
Well, I haven't had any in for years, and I really don't know. I mean, I did try looking for a few, but I haven't had much luck.
Because there is sense in considering where the plant grows in proximity to you, only in the sense that it can bring specific relevant resonance because it's from where we are. So as physical beings as well, that is a important part of our multidimensionality. We are physical, we are expressing energy in a physical form. When that's the case, we have to consider the fact that other things that share space with us have a harmonic with us, if you like. I know you play guitar, I do too. You know what it's like if the other day I was sat in a music room, and as I played one of the strings, it was affecting the snare skin on a drum kit that was nearby.
It resonates the room at that frequency.
That's right, yeah. And so similarly, that's what I feel that some of these sacred plants are there for, to say, well, I can teach you about the depths of the jungle in Peru. I can teach you about the desert lands in Africa, but I can also teach you about the woodland of Europe, and I can also teach you about where you live. So I think it is useful from time to time to try and get proximity to the plant you're bringing into your body.
But I have had a taste recently for doing plants that are not from here too, because I think one of the good things about being in this time now where we can get access to things from the rest of the world is it makes us entheogenically well travelled too.
It does, doesn't it? I mean, there's no harm in that diversity, I agree. And as I say, I'm particularly interested in salvia, and that, you know, is a sort of Mexican sage plant, part of the mint family, I believe. So salvia divinorum can be obtained as a little extract here in a little plastic vial or whatever. But it does definitely bring characteristics of the place. I mean, I could tell you kind of trip reports here, but perhaps we'll do that offline. Very specific elements that are not in my consciousness, that are not something I've seen in media, that just spring from the plant into me. But if you consider that as we were saying, going back to your original point, as part of field uplink, what we're seeing is that I am uploading into the field and travelling to where that plant still resonates from. So none of it is local at all. It's all part of this, as we say, this complete flowing system, which I, using one of my words again, call the ultra soup.
Oh yeah, I like that, ultra soup. That's a good one. Alright, we're at the end of the first section we can use in the first podcast anyway, but well, cheers for that.
You're welcome.